So first thing we're going to do today actually is take up the test. Let's see here. There we go. Uh-oh, let me just fix the screen. There we go. Okay, so let's take a look at the test. I think for the multiple choice, people did okay. There were a few people got tripped up. I think this one actually I was pretty happy with that most people got the correct answer. So remember, a pH of 3 is 10 to the minus 3, not 3 times 10 to the minus 1. So good job on that. This one here was kind of interesting. Number 2, a lot of people got this wrong. This is just the trends on dissolved oxygen. And so as the water gets colder, the amount of dissolved oxygen increases, right? So that's the right answer. I'm not sure what people were missing there, whether they just missed that, but that's an important concept to know. All right, number 3, I think most people did okay on this one. E is actually referring to ammonia, and what that chemical formula is actually methane. So it's the wrong formula. Everything else is a correct match. All right, true or false? I'll just put these up here. I'm just trying to remember how people did on these questions, but you can see the correct answers. Alkalinity is the ability to neutralize an acid, not a base. Photosynthesis does consume carbon dioxide, and because carbon dioxide is acidic, it will get rid of the acidity. 6, I think most people had the correct one on that, and 7, I think as well, most people got those 2. And I think 8 and 9 as well, most people got correct. I guess this question should have read, because limestone, just change that, contains large amounts of calcium carbonate, and but I think most people had that as well. Okay, number 10. Correct answer is fecal matter, and I was looking for diarrhea and vomiting. Okay, I think there were some people that may have given me some other kind of gastrointestinal type of symptoms, and I may have given you a mark or a part mark for that. But if you didn't have some sort of gastrointestinal kind of symptom, then I didn't give you the mark for that. So hard water does not, that we know of, have any effects on health. It's not making you sick, but it leaves residues. And so I would accept actually 2 answers around residues, 1 on scaling of pipes and 1 just residues on faucets or you know, bathtubs and things like that. Another one was that soap doesn't lather very well when the harder the water is. And taste, bitter is really the word I was looking for. I would accept metallic as well. If you just said bad taste, I may have given you a part mark for that. But more details are always better. Okay, number 12. So I was really just looking for this equation here. What happens when you mix carbon dioxide and water? You get carbonic acid. So if you just gave me the equation, I didn't give you the full mark for that. I wanted you to say something about carbonic acid being produced, or give me further chemical equations. Okay, when it doesn't say just give the chemical equations, it does say explain. So make sure that you do that. This is just a Google image search thing. It says seawater is absorbing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, but it applies to any water can absorb carbon dioxide. Okay, so moving on, let's take a look at the water analysis question here. So there are the values there, and the very first one is basically asking you to add things up. I think everyone was able to add okay. But some people missed the second part of the question or couldn't remember what the cutoff was, but about 500 ppm is considered salty. So this water is 531, and so and I'm just adding up all the concentration of the ions, and so that would be considered in the salty range. Number 2, possible sodium compounds. I think everybody got that one correct, so good job on that. And then I think for C as well, converting everything to milliequivalents per liter. I think everyone got that one as well. Just a warning, some people were not really giving me very good significant digits, and it kind of got them in trouble a little bit later. Okay, so you can see I'm carrying 2. I actually did this in a spreadsheet, and it would have carried all the digits, but I did test with 2, and 2 digits after the decimal got me all the right answers. So drawing a milliequivalents per liter bar graph, you can see that thing there. Use a ruler, okay? I like neat things. I like things that look professional. Don't forget your units. Don't forget all your numbers. Most people had an idea of what they were doing anyway on this, so should have been a couple of easy marks. Balance error. I think most people had an idea of what the equation was. 1 or 2 people missed something with the equation. But this is where the rounding could get people in trouble. So the correct answer is 2.6%. I think if you had 2.4 to 2.8, I gave you the full marks. But some people, I think somebody even had 1.4 just due to extreme rounding errors. So watch out for that kind of thing. Usually I don't care too much about the rounding if it's within, you know, if it's close enough. But 1.5 and 2.6 are hugely different. So make sure that you do be careful with your digits. What kind of error, why do we have an error? These were the 3 things I think we mentioned in class that I could recall anyway. So rounding, sometimes errors in tests, or just saying like every test, no test is 100% accurate, right? So if you measure something and then the result is, you know, 32 ppm, it's probably 32 ppm plus or minus 5 ppm or something like that. Every test has a little bit of error to it. And the last one is that sometimes we don't test everything, right? In this case here, you can see iron hasn't been tested, or so we don't know. That could be a significant concentration of its ion in there. Okay, F is calculating the hardness. So remember, hardness is calcium and magnesium. So you're adding up the calcium and magnesium, and then you're converting back to milligrams per liter calcium carbonate. So you can see here I'm adding up the calcium and magnesium. I get 5.69 milliequivalents per liter, multiplying by 50, and I get 284.5. And so according to this scale, it's very hard, and this is kind of making me laugh because I meant to change the question to not give us very hard. And so when I was reading everybody's answers, I'm like, what? And then I realized I had not modified the concentrations of calcium and magnesium to make them a little bit lower. All right, last question was alkalinity. Alkalinity is just carbonate and bicarbonate. Okay, so I'm just adding those 2 up, and I get 6.16 milliequivalents per liter. Convert back to 50. Convert back to milligrams per liter by multiplying by 50, and I get 307.9. So according to these recommendations here, whoever put that out, that guideline 2200, this is higher than that, and so this water would be considered unsafe. So make sure with your units, by the way, that you do use milligrams per liter calcium carbonate, okay, not just milligrams per liter, but the units, technically the units are milligrams per liter calcium carbonate. So make sure that you do have that. Okay, hopefully that was straightforward. You can always review the video when you're looking at your test and see what where you went wrong. But hold on to your tests, and I recommend when you study for the final exam, you basically redo all your tests and redo all the problems, because on the final exam, you're going to see many of the exact same problems. As I mentioned, sometimes I switch them around a little bit in terms of, you know, maybe, you know, rather than converting to milliequivalents per liter, or convert the other way around. But generally, a lot of very similar types of questions you're going to see on the final exam. Okay, so let us go back to PowerPoint. And so hopefully you enjoyed that little cartoon here. You can see that he's talking about Giardia. And so we talked about Giardia last day. And So just a reminder of some of the things that we've talked about. So we talked about bacteria. So the big one, of course, for bacteria is E. coli. But there's also Salmonella and a few others. Salmonella. Okay, I can't spell. There we go. Salmonella. So interesting fact, Salmonella doesn't have anything to do with the fish. It was named after a guy named Daniel Salmon. And we also talked about Legionella. Legionella.
I do have one question. It's like,
Yeah, hold on a second. I'm just going to turn the volume up. Go ahead.
Is algae a part of E. coli? You know, algae like in the water?
No, algae are their own group because they're not necessarily plants, but they're a lot more plant-like than the other groups. Okay, so algae have a nucleus, whereas E. coli does not, and algae are photosynthetic. Now there are photosynthetic bacteria, and we'll talk about some of those in actually a few minutes. But
Yeah, that's what I guess that's what I mixed up one of the questions. Like I thought that was like algae.
yeah.
I can think of E. coli, but
Yeah, and we'll talk about algae in a few minutes. There's definitely some mix-ups about them, how people talk about them outside of classes as well, right?
mm-hmm.
So protozoans, we just talked about last day. So there's Giardia, that's beaver fever. And we talked about the entamoeba. So those are amoebas that crawl around. And we talked about cryptosporidium. So cryptosporidium is sometimes people will just call it crypto. So remember with the protists, kind of the big thing to remember about them is that all three of those can form cysts. So the cysts are these little dormant structures that are resistant to chlorination. So all three of those, they can contaminate drinking water. It could be from people camping or just issues with treatment. And sometimes that's why we get the boil water advisories, is because of these particular organisms, because they are resistant to chlorination. So if there's a known contamination event, this is why we'll have that one reason why I have a boil water advisory. So I want to talk about some of these other things here. So viruses and algae and helminths, and actually I don't think I have my slides exactly in that order. I have the worm I want to talk about first. So the term for a parasitic worm is a helminth. And there's many helminths out there, by the way. And if you have pets, sometimes they get different types of worms. And I'm not really familiar with pet worms, but I know there's heartworms. I think there's something called a whipworm that dogs can get, and there's a few others. So one of the big groups of parasitic worms that humans can get are these things called the schistosomes. And so you can see what I'm trying to show you here is that schistosomes have these really complex life cycles. And usually the life cycles include some sort of vertebrate. So a human is a vertebrate, right? We have a spine. It could be a deer, a goat. There's a whole bunch of these things out in the wild. And they also involve an invertebrate. So they will parasitize a snail as well. So you can see in this particular, with this particular schistosome here, we've got some sort of aquatic snail, and humans are the two hosts. Sometimes they involve 3 or 4 hosts. There's one out there that I was looking at. It involves 2 different types of fish species and a human and a snail. The good news is most of these are not in Canada. You're looking at tropical and subtropical diseases, and there's a whole bunch of them. There's liver flukes and blood flukes and all those kind of things. And in most cases, people are actually getting these from eating undercooked fish, right? So I know some people are thinking they're bringing right to sushi. Don't worry too much about sushi in Canada. In Canada, sushi has to be flash frozen before we consume it.
So oh yeah. I was just gonna ask, or else I don't know if we're gonna get to that, but so yeah, she said most of that stuff isn't in Canada, but what is in Canada?
That's what I'm just about to get to. I was just going to tell you, don't worry about your sushi though, because it is flash frozen and that kills the eggs.
That's good because I love sushi.
Yeah, I know. Everyone panics, right? You know, we got to give up all the good things in life, it seems. So there's a list of a whole bunch there. You may have heard of some of these organisms. Some of them are important in, like I said, other parts of the world. But like I said, tropical, subtropical, and you know, that's how we get rid of, if that's a cure for tropical diseases, is it's called winter. But in Canada, we do have one type of schistosome that affects wildlife that can cause human problems. And there's a bunch of species, so sometimes we just call them animal schistosomes, or sometimes duck schistosomes, because they're found in organisms like ducks and other waterfowl. And this is the one that causes swimmer's itch. So I have been unfortunate to have swimmer's itch. I think I've had it twice years ago. It wasn't too bad for me. I know some people get it really, really bad. But the whole idea behind swimmer's itch is you've got this parasite that's infecting the snails and it's infecting the ducks. Or like I said, sometimes other waterfowl, so that would include things like loons and geese and cormorants and potentially seagulls and you know, birds that are basically swimming around, right?
Honestly, yeah, because you're from Ontario, right?
Yeah.
A lot of I wasn't surprised if you got swimmer's itch, because I mean,
Well,
like
all you need
kind
are
of the
the ducks and the snails and the right body of water, right? And basically this is spread by the ducks pooping, and it infects the snails. And I just want to point out this little thing here. So this is kind of I don't know if you'd call it a larval stage. I'm sure it has a name. I don't exactly know the name, but you can see after it infects the snail, it comes out of the snail, and that little thing, it's microscopic, and it swims around, and eventually, like, it's looking for another duck, right? And sometimes humans go swimming where there might be ducks, and on years that are particularly a little extra warm, the snails can breed a lot better, and there's more of these in the water. And so, you know, they're looking for a duck, and they literally penetrate the duck's skin. That's how they get into the duck. But sometimes they find a human leg, and they penetrate into that skin, and that's actually game over for the parasite, because it can't infect humans. It dies. But now the human has a little something under their skin, and it gets itchy. So some people react really, really badly and get violent allergic reactions to this. Both times I had it, I was like itchy for one day. I think I went to the pharmacy and got some sort of anti-itch lotion, had one of those oatmeal baths, and the next day I was fine, right? But I know people who've had these, and they've been itchy for days on end, and you basically have to treat the symptoms, and that's kind of the end of the story, really. Yeah, basically. Okay, so that's just kind of the summary, mentioning the parasites, so the Giardia, Cryptosporidium, Entamoeba, swimmer's itch. You can see there's a whole bunch there on the bottom that sometimes come up in discussions about waterborne infections. You may have heard of some of these, or maybe not. Toxoplasma is the one that's associated with cat feces, and it is important, like if you're pregnant, that you don't handle cat feces, because it can affect the fetus. But usually not so much with waterborne infections, more just people that are gardening or interacting with their litter box. So let's talk about viruses. This has been the whole conversation of the year, I guess, talking about viruses. And so viruses are very, 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 very tiny. They're much smaller than bacteria, much smaller than protists, and they're not usually considered living. They're more or less, you've got a nucleic acid, so you've got some RNA or DNA, and then it's in a protective coat, and that protective coat is usually made of proteins, and sometimes it has like a membrane coat. So these are very tiny. You can't see them with like a normal microscope. You have to have an electron microscope, and some of them, of course, make us sick, and some of them, of course, are associated with waterborne infections. So you can see I have a list there that are associated with waterborne infections, like polio and rotavirus. These are things we have vaccines for and are usually quite protected from. But in terms of what's going on in Canada, the biggest concerns are hepatitis A and norovirus. So let's talk about those. So hepatitis A is highly associated with places with less than ideal water sanitation conditions. So this is probably the same map I showed you last day with the traveler's diarrhea, like probably the exact same countries with issues. There are outbreaks once in a while in Canada, usually associated with some sort of contaminated produce. I was reading about one, I think it was in Boston, and there was an outbreak in a restaurant and a couple dozen cases, and I think it was contaminated onions or something like that, right? So it's really the same story with all of these other diseases. We've got feces that is contaminating food or water, and people are getting sick. So let's talk a little bit about hepatitis A. Probably a lot of people are familiar, or at least a little bit, with hepatitis B. It turns out there's a whole bunch of hepatitis viruses. So hepatitis B and C are the ones that sometimes you learn a little bit more about in school, partly because there's a vaccine for hepatitis B, and that's the one you get. I think it's about grade 5 or 6. Most people get the vaccine for it. Unless you're me, I'm too old. There was no vaccine when I was in grade 6, so it's a bit of a newer thing. But it's been out for a while now. And hepatitis B and C are associated with basically sex and drugs and not rock and roll, I guess.
Yeah.
But there's a vaccine for B and not for C. Hepatitis A, we hear about a little less often, unless you do some traveling. And it's one of those things that if you go to a traveler's clinic, they might ask you, do you want a shot for hepatitis A? Because there is a vaccine for it.
Doesn't hepatitis like B or something that have a nickname? Isn't that HIV? That's what
well, hepatitis B is a lot like HIV in that it's spread the same way. It doesn't necessarily include the same symptoms. Anything that has the word hepatitis in it means it's infecting the liver. So hepatitis B can be run from very serious disease to very mild disease, but it's chronic. A lot like HIV, it's chronic, meaning once you get infected, you're stuck with it, right? So that's one reason why the vaccine is important for people getting it. Hepatitis A, like I said, is different because it's spread by contaminated food and water, and so you get the usual symptoms: diarrhea, vomiting, cramps. You can get inflammation of the liver and some jaundice. So jaundice means your liver is not working properly, and I'm not exactly sure how it works, but your skin kind of turns yellowish. And sometimes babies will have a bit of jaundice because the liver is just not really awake yet, after they're born, particularly premature babies. So the good news about hepatitis A is twofold. A, first of all, you can get a vaccine for it if you do some traveling. And B, if you get sick, usually it's not bad. You get mild disease, or at least it goes away after a week, kind of thing. You may not get sick right away. You can see it's talking about incubation period. So it's pretty common for people to travel somewhere, get hepatitis A, come back home, and then get sick. So that's kind of a typical thing about hepatitis A. So like I said, if you do some traveling, you can get a shot for this. I can't remember whether this one is the double shot or whether you get one shot on it, but I know I had it years ago, probably 20 years ago now. I did some traveling and the travel clinic gave it to me. And then I'm trying to remember what year it was. Was it 3 years ago, 4 years ago? I went to Mexico and I looked into it and they said, well, we recommend you get the booster shot. So I ended up doing that just in case.
How did that feel?
Oh, it wasn't too bad. Kind of like typical. You get the shot in the arm, you're all scared about it, and then afterwards you realize it wasn't too bad.
Yeah, I had I think
I'm
one of
more
the
scared
schools.
about the thought of the actual needle than the actual needle.
Yeah. One of the shots I remember getting in middle school, they had to, like PI, because it didn't affect Alberta much, but
Yeah, some of them, a lot of vaccines will give you obviously maybe a little soreness around you get the shot, and sometimes
I had to get I remember in middle school way back then I had to get the swine flu. I had to get the swine flu vaccination.
And that one, the flu shots in particular tend to give a little bit of a mild fever sometimes, and that's actually a good thing. It's showing that your immune system is working, right? It's actually just
it was like
hey, there's something here. We got to do something about it. and that's what the fever is all about.
Yeah, everyone in the school had to get it because it was it was in a massive like outbreak, I think.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that was
it was like a
2009,
pandemic.
2010,
Yeah.
and that was our last pandemic. So we'll see what we have again in another 10 years. So let's talk about norovirus. Norovirus goes by many names. It used to be called Norwalk virus, and the people of Norwalk, I think it's Ohio or Connecticut, they didn't really want the virus named after their town, and so it was renamed to norovirus. And sometimes you see in the news they call it the winter vomiting bug, or some people sometimes call it the stomach flu. That's really inaccurate because the flu is a respiratory disease. So I don't like it when people call it the stomach flu, but it's probably not going to go away. So, you know, you can see, found this little graphic on the internet, right? Influenza, you can see right in the name is flu. And that's a respiratory disease, and that's the one that we get the annual flu shot for. And that was the H1N1 that you were just talking about, right? And so respiratory means, you know, all those symptoms around the lungs and throat and stuff, right? So cough and a sore throat and, you know, fevers are pretty common with the flu. Norovirus, on the other hand, is a gastrointestinal virus, and sometimes I joke with one of my other classes. I call it the two bucket illness. So just use your brain for a second and think about what two buckets we're talking about. We're talking about diarrhea and vomiting from both ends. And
it's absolutely horrible. I lost 13 pounds in 3 days.
Yeah. So how long did you have it? Just a day or two?
Oh yeah, like I had it for 3 days, but it was like it was bad. I literally had a bed in the bathroom.
It's pretty typical for people to have pretty severe illness for anywhere from 1 to 2, sometimes 3 days is pretty typical. And like you said, yeah, you can lose a lot of fluids. I remember, I suspect I had it when I moved into my house, because I remember somebody got sick, somebody else got sick, and then I got sick, and it was like every 3 days somebody was sick over like a week.
That's why it's even if you're sick when you have no appetite, it's important to stay hydrated, like with water, because you're really when you have diarrhea, you're really losing a lot of fluids, and that's
no, it's not fun. And I actually have a graphic here. Norovirus, you don't want it. But usually it's not fatal, which is good. It's pretty common kind of thing. It's very, very infectious, by the way. I was reading about a study on norovirus that was done in an airplane a number of years ago. So somebody got onto an airplane, and I think they vomited. And like within, I think it was a week, 200 other people were sick. So the people sitting near them got somebody else sick, and those people got somebody else sick, kind of thing, right? It's one of those things that it's very persistent. Hand sanitizer, for example, doesn't work against the Norwalk virus. It's just a very stable in the environment kind of thing. It's very famous for causing outbreaks in cruise ships, care homes for older people, and daycares, and you know, and you hear about these sometimes. You know, people going on a cruise and the entire ship gets sick, and the number one suspect is often the norovirus because of that.
Yeah, Blaine. I also remember getting something like that. Like one time, I ate expired yogurt and I vomited, and like I woke up the next morning vomiting like for like 10 minutes, and then ended up losing like some weight because I lost some fluids.
It is not fun, yeah. Like norovirus is definitely characterized by some extreme fluid loss, and can be really nasty. I do remember when I had it, it was like, thankfully it was 1 day, but it was just, I mean, what a day, right? You know, living in the bathroom the whole day and trying to, you know, drink as much Gatorade as possible. I feel like there's one other thing I was going to say about norovirus. Oh yeah, there's no vaccine for this one, unfortunately, and that seems to be a misconception. I hear people talking about getting the norovirus vaccine, and there is no vaccine for this. You know, here's an interesting fun fact about norovirus is that this is one of these things that we don't know how to grow in a lab. So how do we study it? Well, we can study the genetics around it. And the other way that they've studied it is by, believe it or not, human volunteers. I'm not signing up for that one. But that has been one way that they've studied it.
I could lose 30 pounds.
I know. Every time I think about that, I'm just horrified, right?
Well, they did that. Well, they did that for. I think they did that for Corona, and that took them months to figure it out how to.
Well,
find
the
a vaccine.
thing is, when you're doing human experimental trials, the biggest ethical consideration is anyone going to die from it, right? And so for norovirus, it's very, very seldom that people actually die from it. From the coronavirus, it's a little bit more common. Mortality rate is around 2% or something like that. Depending on your age, it can be much higher or much lower. And so there have been a lot of studies proposed that were totally outright rejected. But some places felt, again, you've got that cost, risk analysis kind of thing, the benefits outweigh the risks. And so there have been some human studies, but I think there's been a lot of questions about how ethical they are, because in theory, some people can get very sick from it, right? And be fatal or long-term consequences. Whereas norovirus, the consequences are short and intense, and they go away until you get it again, which is unfortunate. Which it does happen. People can get norovirus again. So, this is the kind of thing when people get norovirus, right? Ends up in a daycare or something like that, and they shut it down for a day and clean everything sometimes, right? And cruise ships is a little harder to do. Everyone's just, you've got a high concentration of people living in a small amount of area, unfortunately. Yeah, that's a good point. I haven't looked at anything recent, but I know I was looking at a study looking at other respiratory viruses, and the amount of flu cases are like minimal. Of course, the question is how much are being reported as well, because some people are just getting sick and staying home, and they would be the normal people that might go to the doctor when they have the slightest sniffle, right? So there's definitely a few cases out there, and I'm guessing a lot of other community transmitted diseases like this are down dramatically. But we still have daycares open. But the biggest concern right now, of course, is COVID-19, which is also extremely infectious, right? But you're right. Everyone's, they're washing their hands more. They're doing all those good things. So it's, we've seen numbers. I haven't seen any numbers on norovirus. It's not like, so some diseases are reported, like the flu. If your doctor or nurse suspects you have it, it gets written down, it gets sent to public health. Norovirus is not reportable, right? So there's a number of diseases that, somebody, they have a cold or whatever, they don't report them. So the numbers aren't tracked as carefully, right? Unless somebody was actually doing it for a study.
Flashback to March 2020 when that thing was when this pandemic started. That sign was like all over the place.
Oh yeah, I know.
It was
right?
the truth. The truth is, Fahad. So they already it's a lot of the stuff they kept that under wraps for months. It's been why is for run like this? Technically, we're about a year and a half into this pandemic because there was a case. Because it was the earliest signs that showed of this virus was of September of 2019.
Yeah, that's because back then the virus wasn't as big of a problem. People just left it off thinking it was a flu. So a lot of people just recovered.
Yeah.
Well, here's here's a water quality related thing to COVID-19. So COVID-19 is primarily a respiratory virus, but you do shed it in your feces. I know in the news recently, they were actually talking about doing anal swabs in China. I'm not sure what the purpose was. I kind of didn't want to read that particular article. But as you're mentioning, so the disease was first recognized roughly in December 2019. That's why it's called COVID-19. In terms of people were recognizing some unusual types of pneumonia. The virus was characterized in January last year. But, and I didn't realize they did this, but in several countries, they have apparently archived sewage samples. So I didn't realize they did this at some water treatment plants. They have water samples and they archive them. And so they went back and tested them. And they found the virus at least as far back as September in Spain, which shows that it was out of China. We don't even know if it originated in China. But it was definitely out of China in September of 2019 as detected in these sewage samples in Spain, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah, and they didn't know what to call it because it was unknown. But
yeah, exactly.
It was here. Okay, so it was here. Like I know, because so my dad, he never gets sick. He got sick last year, and it was like, it was basically, not even kidding. It was like most.
I mean,
of the
it's possible, right? I know that 2019 in particular, there were. It seemed like there were a lot of respiratory illnesses going around, and I guess we'll never know exactly because there are lots of other viruses that float around and infect people. Unless they were tested, we'll never know for sure. But definitely, that is. I have a hypothesis going around that it's been in circulation for a little bit longer than we suspect. So moving on, I mentioned polio and hepatitis E. Hepatitis E is pretty rare, but also spread by fecal matter, and polio spread by fecal matter, but most people are vaccinated against that, so it's not something that probably any of us will see in our lifetime because it's so rare. Okay, so I think we talked a little bit about some of this stuff before, maybe in a different context, but so here's just some factors kind of talking about, the disease, right? So one thing that, as I mentioned, is a thing with hepatitis A, is incubation period is a while. So sometimes, people get contaminated and it takes us, at least a couple of weeks to control the situation because you don't know that the contamination is there until people get sick and there's an investigation. And so the term for that is latency, meaning the time between the person getting exposed and actually getting sick. Sometimes the dose is a big deal. So if you ever go traveling and you get that traveler's diarrhea, and you get, one pathogenic E. coli, it's not going to make you sick, right? We're talking about you need hundreds of thousands of organisms in most cases to make you sick. Norovirus, unfortunately, is a lot lower than 100, but in most cases, for most organisms to make you sick, you need thousands, right? So, if you just have a little bit in the water, it's not a big deal. So we'll talk a bit more about what numbers are acceptable in drinking water and all that. But the answer is 0, by the way. Persistent, sometimes some things can survive longer than others. Norovirus is particularly famous for being quite durable. So as we mentioned, we talked about the main symptoms, diarrhea and nausea. Major cause is fecal contamination. And I think we had mentioned before, usually we classify these as 3 sources, right? So we're talking about human waste. And in Canada, human waste is usually in sewers or septic systems or, outhouses or something like that. And so sometimes they do leak into drinking water supplies or there's other situations occurring. And of course, if you do some traveling, like I said, sometimes there are systems where the wastewater is basically being dumped directly into the ocean or directly into a river, and this is a big deal, right? I know I was watching a documentary about the Ganges River in India, and I think I don't know whether this is true or not, but they were calling it the most polluted river in the world.
It's true.
And I've seen the pictures. It's pretty bad. And
Very bad, yeah.
It's also a very special river, is my understanding, and people are bathing in it and doing all sorts of things, right?
Yeah.
And you can only imagine.
Oh yeah, they've had I'm not surprised by their pollution. I mean, I've seen pictures. They had the water was so polluted at times that it would be like chemical foam, and they turned the water pink at one point.
Yeah, and that's not the only water body out there that's contaminated. But that's one where you've got a high amount of contamination and, of course, a very large number of people. I think I've lost count, but I'm pretty sure India is more than 1 billion now. And, you blink and 20,000 more babies are born. There's so many people, right? Anyway, yeah, and then of course we've got the animal and wildlife and agricultural runoff is a big one as well. So, and they all have their own issues and problems, and in terms of trying to protect our water supplies and whatnot. So, I mean, in Fort McMurray, we're not usually concerned too much with the agricultural runoff. Last time I checked, there aren't any farms for hundreds of kilometers, at least in large scale. But in other areas, it's very, very important. I'm from Ontario, and a lot of cities will have man-made reservoirs, so man-made lakes, where they basically pool water there for for drinking water for a particular city. And there's also a lot of farming too, right? So usually they plan them so there aren't farms nearby, or at least when they build the reservoir, it's built up so that there aren't going to be any crazy floods that cause any spillover, right? And that's a big part of it, is protecting your water supply, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I just found this recently. This was from, there's a website called Alberta Water. It's not the most amazing website, but they do have a lot of useful little things on it. And this is one of the things they were talking about is, what can people do if they're concerned about their water? And you can see that number one there, clean up after your dogs. Always a good idea. But you can see a number of other things there, right? People, it's important if they have septic systems that they're working properly and not leaking and contaminating the drinking water. And of course, anything else to do with contamination of feces, people need to treat properly. They do recommend you boil your water if you go camping. Confession, I never do. It's a river I drink out of it, probably because of where I'm from, an area with lots of pristine lakes and rivers, but probably should do a little bit better. But you can see the last note there is that sometimes there are swimming areas, and they do have warnings about things like swimmer's itch if it's been detected. And so always a good idea to watch out for those kind of things. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about, I think probably just enough time to do so, a little bit about microbiology analysis of water and what that's all about. And I guess this other stuff we'll have to save till after the break. So how do we look for microbes in water? Usually something that's done is often water is filtered. It depends on whether you're just looking for the presence of it or whether you're trying to count the number of microbes in the water. So you guys for lab 3, you did a coliform analysis. Did you guys see the results for that? Okay, yeah, so
we saw it.
I think last year, if I remember correctly, only 2 samples had coliforms in them. One was the control, we had an E. coli culture, and the other was the wastewater. And
yeah,
that's
me
good.
and Zishan did an analysis, and we got positive for the well water, the groundwater,
Yeah.
the well water, and a little bit positive from the snow melt, but negative in the tap
Yeah.
water.
And then that's all possible, right? And one thing to keep in mind is that none of you, are necessarily thinking about doing everything aseptically and all that. A technician would be doing it under sterile conditions with gloves and all that. And I'm not sure if that's something that you did. I know one year we tested. I think I had 4 groups test the tap water, and 2 groups that tested positive. And it's not like, by the way, if you contaminate a sample, it doesn't mean you're not washing your hands after going to the bathroom. Bacteria are just sticky, and you can wash your hands and get rid of 99.something%, but you're never going to get rid of 100% of them. It's a very easy contaminated sample. So what we're actually looking for usually, by the way, is E. coli. But if you're trying to count numbers, the way they do it is they have this kind of apparatus here, and you can see you can put water through it and filter it, and then you're collecting whatever's in the water on that filter and looking for bacteria. I think I have a picture of an actual one here. And you can put, it could be 10 liters or 2 liters or whatever your analysis is asking you to do. it gets filtered through, and the filter can be tested for bacteria. So this is one here where somebody's doing a test. It looks like they're doing tap water and stream water, and the bacteria are growing on the one with the stream water. So probably no surprise there. There are animals that would be using that stream, and of course, where there are animals, there are their waste products, which are going to be full of bacteria. So what we're looking for is something called coliforms, and it's almost used interchangeably with E. coli. So cola means colon, right? Coli for E. coli is colon, right? And so this means that organisms that are found in your intestine, they're a group of organisms, and the ones particularly found in your intestines are called fecal coliforms. Don't worry too much about the difference between the two things. Just know that they're basically, it's E. coli and a bunch of related organisms are what we mean when we say coliforms. So this is kind of a little chart showing, you know, you've got different bacteria, you've got these round cockeye ones, these spirally shaped ones, you've got these rod-shaped ones, which are called bacillus, and then, so coliforms and fecal coliforms are just subclassifications of these things, and these are things that, you know, like I said, I don't want you to worry about too much. Just know that a coliform is something that's, that includes E. coli and some related species. So, oh, here's a little cartoon for you. It says, "Come on, gang, we have the beach to ourselves. Fecal coliforms at play, yay!" So what is this all about, right? If you hear that there's E. coli at the beach, don't worry about it at first. Look into it. There's E. coli at every beach. There's animals at every beach, so they're gonna find E. coli there. There are moose swimming around and whatever else that's out there. The question is what the counts are. Of course, if it's high and warm, you definitely don't want to be drinking the water for sure. So why are we looking for E. coli? There are a whole list. We just talked about hepatitis A, Giardia, and all these things. So the thing is, what we don't want to do is do a test for everything. We're not going to send a water sample to a lab and look for Giardia, look for hepatitis A, look for polio, look for this, look for that, look for norovirus. Instead, it's super easy just to do one test, and basically we're looking for coliforms, which basically means E. coli. And so why do we do that? Because if we find E. coli, we find coliforms, we know there's been fecal contamination, which means there might be some of those other things involved. And so coliform tests are kind of looking for an idea of you know, how many bacteria in the water, particularly fecal coliforms, because that is indicating feces, human or animal. And if we're talking about drinking water, so the drinking water plant here, you can see this is right from the Canadian drinking water guidelines, and they say they test, you test 100 milliliters of water, and you should find 0 coliforms or E. coli, right? So that's good. I mean, there should be none in our water. But then you can see that the subsection says, if they do find one in the sample, it's not assumed necessarily that there's E. coli in the water. What they're telling is that you know, they know contamination happens. So if they end up with a positive result, you do 10 more samples, and 1 out of every 10 might be positive. If there's higher than that, then they have cause for concern, and that's what that second little paragraph means. So like I said, testing for E. coli is just sort of on the, you know, on the assumption that if there's fecal matter in there, there might be some of those other organisms, but they all have very specialized tests, and it gets expensive, and you're talking about training technicians and all these kind of things. And so it's just easier to look for E. coli or coliforms, which are related to E. coli. So there's a whole bunch of different type of tests out here. I remember doing this particular test when I was a student. It's kind of cool. You've got a big test tube and a little test tube. And this one is a lot like the one that you guys did in the lab. What colors were they changing? Do you guys recall? Was it purple to yellow or something? Or yeah, maybe I'll get you to show me them afterwards. But the one I'm familiar with, it goes purple to yellow. And this particular test as well also has that mini test tube on the inside that captures gas. And the gas shows that you have fecal coliforms rather than just normal coliforms. But like I said, there's a whole bunch of different tests out there. If we get a chance to go to the wastewater treatment plant, you're probably going to see this thing here. And so I'm not entirely sure of all the chemistry behind this particular test, but what it is, it's a multi-well system. So if you take a look at that, you've got 5 times 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So you can do about 40 samples in this little test. So it's a little plastic pack, and you would inject the water sample in, and then it gets incubated. And if it turns yellow, then it means there are coliforms in that particular sample. And so, you know, this is pretty common for a lot of labs where you're testing water samples, is try to find ways to, you know, multitask and do a whole bunch of samples at once. And anyway, like I said, if we get to go on the tour, you'll definitely, they'll probably show you that when we go to the lab. And now you know what it is. It's just testing for E. coli, and you know that yellow is yes.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I think that is where I wanted to finish today. We still have a few other things, so sorry we didn't quite get to algae. That is next. That will be after the reading break. And we'll talk a little bit about biochemical oxygen demand. I know you talked about it in the lab already. And a tiny bit about wastewater treatment as well, which I don't cover in a lot of detail in this unit. I just kind of show you a little bit about it because we have a full unit kind of near in the other half of the course anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so Wednesday, and I guess I will see you guys after the break. So if you have any questions
after the spring break,
let me know. I know some people were not able to make it today. I can always probably scan it and send it to you if you like.
Oh,
Thanks, Blaine.
okay,
All right, have a good day.
Bye.
Bye, Blaine.